Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Sustainable Finance Action and Advocacy, a roadmap for Global South cities. Thank you all so much for joining us today from around the world. We're really excited to host this webinar in the middle of a critical milestone, which is the fourth International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla, Spain. Hopefully, some of you are there attending and not melting in the extreme heat. So the aims of the webinar today are to provide city leaders and those of you who want to support those city leaders with a framework and tools to enhance your finance advocacy efforts. So basically, it's how we can help you become a champion for more finance for your city. So how to attract that finance. And the webinar may be helpful for you if you're, for example, a city that is trying to lobby the national government for a change in policy that can unlock resources for your investment priorities, or a city that's trying to engage development banks in your region to secure funding for a particular project, or a city that's participating in a global event like Finance for Development or COP30, and you want to think about how you want to bring your voice and your messaging on a global stage. So we hope to give you some effective tools to support your finance advocacy efforts. Next slide. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Andrea Fernandez. I'm a managing director at C40 Cities. I'm lead our climate finance, knowledge, and partnerships. And just wanted to acknowledge the other partners that we've been working with us on, which includes the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is a network of 13,000 cities around the world, the United Nations Environment Program, and Urban Shift, which has been a key program through which we've developed this important resource. Next slide. And just a reminder on interpretation. So if English is not your first language, we do have the option to listen to interpretation in Spanish, Portuguese, or French. You just need to click on the little interpretation button, and hopefully that will work well for you. Next slide. Also want to let everyone know that the session will be recorded, and that's to help us in capturing the feedback and really using this as a knowledge sharing tool with other cities. We will be sharing the recording, the slides, and other resources after the session to all of you who have registered. And we should have an opportunity for Q&A at the end, but what we'd like to do is ask you to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we've got a team of people who's ready to dive in and to help to answer some of those questions so that we've got the opportunity to address the most questions during the event and hopefully can get a little bit of time for discussion at the end. Next slide. So in terms of agenda for today, I will help to kind of set the scene for how we've developed this roadmap and why. Then we have Lucy from C40 presenting the roadmap and going into deep dive on the framework we've used and the core thematic areas of the roadmap. Next, we'll have perspectives from private finance and public finance with Jesse from Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, CCFLA, speaking around private finance, and Enrique from WRI Ross Center in Brazil, speaking around public finance. Finally, we'll have closing remarks from Gulnara at UNEP and hopefully some time for Q&A. Okay, so let's get on with the topic of today. Next slide. Thank you. So why are we here today? We know that there's a huge finance gap in cities. From a climate point of view, there's 4.3 trillion that was estimated by TCFLA last year as the amount that needs to be invested annually for urban climate mitigation. We know that in global south regions around the world, 90% of climate finance needs are not being met. And we also have huge development investment needs as well. So it's an estimated that some $60 trillion of investment is needed in urban infrastructure in Africa and Asia to help those cities cope with the rapid urbanization and the rapid growth that they are facing. At the same time, the lack of investment is also having huge developmental impacts as well. And we see this in terms of healthcare, the impacts on healthcare from climate risk, the figure we've got here is 2 to 4 billion in annual healthcare costs in Asia by 2030 from climate risks. We have a decline in agricultural productivity, which of course has a knock-on effect on cities who are huge consumers of food. 34% decline in productivity in almost every region in the global south. And then we know that cities aren't prepared to deal with climate impacts and health systems in particular. And here the figure 62% of countries in Latin America and Caribbean do not have urban health services that are adequately prepared to manage climate risk. Next slide. So, so we've got this huge finance gap, and I think from C40 perspective, the the topic of finance is the number one topic our mayors come and talk to us about, and the number one thing that they are really looking for support on. Cities around the world are needing this help and come to the city networks like C40 and GCOM really looking for that support. Um, so we created this roadmap really as a reference and as a tool so that cities can more effectively engage their national governments, engage the donors, engage the development banks and other development partners to help really, access finance and really start to tackle some of the systemic issues that need to be changed in order to really unlock resources and finance for cities. So it's not just about that local level of resources that cities are looking for, but it's also how cities can use their voice to shape a finance system that really works for cities, because we know we need to unlock the trillions of investment and that needs to be more than just project by project, but we need systemic change in how financial institutions support work in cities, investment in cities. We know the topic is complex, so that's why we created this resource with the hope that it can illuminate how cities can position themselves to support the call for increased finance for sustainable urban development. And please have a look at the QR code so you can download the resource. The way we structured the roadmap was to look at both the action side and advocacy side. And Lucy will go into more detail on this, but on the action side, we wanted to highlight what are those things that cities can do to strengthen their capacity to take on finance, and how can they show that they are good, responsible partners to those financial institutions. So these are the sort of building blocks. And then on advocacy, it's again how cities can use their voice, how can they use their engagement with financial institutions and partners to really open the door to increase finance flows. Next slide, please. So we launched the roadmap at the Green and Resilient Urban Shift Africa Forum that was held in Nairobi in February earlier this year. We had really fantastic discussions with mayors and city leaders on finance challenges, on issues they are facing, and presented the roadmap as a way to support those cities in engaging on this topic. I think we had, if I counted correctly, some 5 hours worth of discussion on finance and really, how cities are experiencing that frustration of wanting to attract investment, but having these real challenges with the policy environment, with being able to engage the financial institutions. So, next slide. This year, I don't think I need to tell anyone, but this is a really pivotal year for cities. It's a really monumental year for a few reasons. So I mentioned the launch of the roadmap in February. We had really fantastic meetings with vice presidents of the multilateral development banks at the World Bank Spring meetings in Washington in April, where this issue of city access to finance is becoming more and more on their radar. And we saw announcements, for example, 2 days ago, a few days ago, from the Inter-American Development Bank that for the first time is going to provide direct sub-sovereign lending to cities, which is really monumental. So the message is getting out there. Just last month, we had a convening in Shwani as part of U20. There's an African Mayors Assembly where also these key issues came up, and certainly at the Finance for Development conference happening now in Sevilla, we're really hoping with city partners that we can push the urban investment need as a key point in the agenda. Then looking ahead towards November, we at C40 have our World Mayor Summit in Rio, and there'll be the larger COP30 Local Leaders Forum organized by Bloomberg Philanthropies, which will convene local leaders from around the world at the subnational level, so city and state governments. And really importantly, at COP30 in Belém, the Baku to Belém roadmap will be presented. This is the roadmap that captures how that estimated 1.3 trillion of climate finance, what does that roadmap look like? How will that be delivered? And for the first time ever, we will have an urban chapter in this roadmap. So this is really hugely significant and an opportunity and a really great opportunity to shape this agenda again to influence these decisions so that they are really taking cities into account. And we at C40 and the Global Covenant are really proud to be able to take part in shaping that agenda. Um, I think now we will go into the actual meat of the roadmap. So let me present Lucy Alden, who is our Head of Sustainable Investment Program at C40 Cities. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Next slide, please. So as Andrea outlined, in order to drive this greater amount of sustainable finance for climate projects and make sure that cities can access it, city leaders need to work on two twin tracks at the same time. Those over which they have more direct control through these policy building blocks and building their own capacity, and those over which they perhaps have less direct control, but where they're still able to influence as climate leaders through their advocacy actions. So this roadmap resource has been created to support city leaders across this spectrum of areas. Each of the 5 themes in the roadmap are identified in terms of whether they are primarily policy building blocks, advocacy actions, or a blend of both. Each theme includes specific action recommendations for city leaders as a clear checklist format. And each theme also outlines the type of stakeholders for city leaders to engage with, for example, at the multilateral, national, subnational, or local level. Next slide, please. So looking at each of the themes in a bit more detail, the first is looking at how city leaders can make climate a strategic priority within the city. And this ensures that climate is at the heart of policy and decision-making, including, crucially, those policies that influence financial decision-making and engagements. So moving from 1.1 on the slide to 1.6 on the slide, first off, we have for city leaders to establish a climate action plan and align targets with the city's financial policies. So for example, that looks at where the city invests its own resources, how the city engages with investors or incentivizes greater spending in climate sectors and projects. And research from C40 actually shows that cities are 3 times more likely to be taking necessary action to reduce emissions if they have a plan and targets in place. So this is a really key recommendation. Next is looking at implementing a climate budget to help embed mitigation, resilience, and equity considerations into the municipal governance, fiscal management, and budgetary processes. And this can really help city leaders to identify climate funding needs and monitor and report on their action, which in turn can help to build investor trust. We also looked at incentivizing investment in local green projects through tax incentives, levies, subsidies, and certification or standards that require locally developed infrastructure to meet strict environmental standards. 1.4 looks at aligning with broader green finance standards. So for example, green or blue bond frameworks and sustainable finance taxonomies. And that's really crucial for providing reliability for those investors who are looking to deploy capital into those city projects. Cities can also look at establishing climate risk policies that are crucially underpinned by data to inform their financial decision-making. And then lastly, there's the opportunity for cities to work with their local pension funds and other institutional investors. So for example, where the mayor of a city may be able to elect members of the board of trustees for the municipal employee pension scheme, this can really help ensure that climate is embedded within those decision-making forums. or they might establish regular dialogues with pension funds and other institutional investors in the city to build collaboration. Next slide, please. So for each of the themes, we are also going to look at a city-specific highlight of how action is being taken. And for this example, we've looked at Cape Town in South Africa, which is taking steps to embed climate as a strategic priority through the development of its climate action plan and using that plan to then inform its municipal financial policies and approaches. So the city of Cape Town has set targets to reduce emissions by over 80% below 2016 levels by 2050, and also for all buildings to be net zero carbon by 2050, and all new buildings being net zero carbon by 2030. And this long-standing strategic climate leadership is also reflected in the city's financial policies. So for example, Cape Town is an active participant of C40's Clean Investment Accelerator, which is a political commitment to help shift finance into clean projects and sectors and engage with others to do the same. And the city is also prioritizing sustainable projects and engaging with investors to also encourage that shift away from investment in fossil fuels and into more clean sectors. Next slide, please. The second theme in the roadmap is looking at how cities can strengthen their capacity to leverage climate finance and work with teams beyond those who work in finance roles and functions to improve project bankability and investment pathways for developed projects. So the first thing that we looked at here was the need to establish a dedicated and well-resourced climate finance unit. And this can really help cities to provide a main point of contact for leading and coordination on climate finance initiatives, and to help bring in personnel from relevant teams beyond finance. So for example, planning and project preparation teams and those involved in environmental risk analysis to make sure this is really linking up that approach and mainstreaming it across numerous departments in the city. Next, it can be useful for city leaders to use focus groups, surveys, and consultations to establish the skills and capacity gaps on climate finance that currently exist. And this can then help inform professional development programs to upskill staff. There's also potentially the opportunity to work with local universities to enhance that capacity within city staff as well on climate finance. And lastly, we looked at the fact that city-led climate projects really need to be prepared with a funding and or financing pathway in mind from very early on, because this is really crucial to help enhance investment readiness and bankability. Next slide, please. So here we looked at Ekurhuleni in South Africa, which is taking steps to strengthen their capacity to leverage climate finance and improve the bankability and investment readiness of their projects. And the city has done this using their climate action plan to identify green investment opportunities and then grouped projects by thematic portfolios. So for example, infrastructure, buildings, transport, thereby strategically bundling together green projects to reach the scale necessary for many banks and investors and to enhance bankability. And secondly, the city has also partnered with its local banks to generate a strong climate investment pipeline and to enable a shift from a one-off project approach to a more portfolio-based financing approach. And the result of these measures is that the city is seeing increased investment in energy efficiency and renewables. Next slide, please. Theme 3 looks at increasing participation from the private sector into urban green projects. And you'll see at the top right-hand side of this slide that this has both building blocks and advocacy action. So cities can directly influence this theme, for example, by using their procurement policies to drive growth and spur investment in climate-friendly industries and technologies. They may also be able to set up partnerships with businesses to discuss climate priorities and implement local climate action, for example, with the support of C40's City Business Climate Alliance program. And secondly, cities can also directly explore the use of blended finance and de-risking mechanisms to help mobilize private investment into those projects. But there are also things that cities can advocate for as well. So engaging with broader stakeholders, and these things are necessary to enhance private sector participation and help drive that finance and delivery of climate projects. So, for example, and you see this with 3.3 on the slide, cities can develop an action plan to work with credit rating agencies to help improve their credit worthiness, which we know is really key to being able to raise funding and finance for cities. And they may call on national governments to remove bureaucratic hurdles for private sector investment into local renewable energy generation. Next slide, please. So here we looked at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which is increasing its private sector participation in urban climate projects through sustainable procurement. It's the first Latin American city to use power purchase agreements to supply renewable energy to its municipal buildings. Following changes in Brazil's energy sector, legal and regulatory frameworks, which opened up the electricity market to the private sector, the city's leadership has decided to procure renewable sourced power through a public tender. And they started with powering the City Hall building with renewable energy, which will save an estimated $6 million over 5 years. And the city then plans to power all of its municipal buildings through power purchase agreements by 2026. Next slide, please. So as discussed, mayors have a really critical role to play in advocating for stronger collaboration and partnerships between national and local climate policies, ensuring that the unique priorities of cities are really fully reflected in national commitments. So this is essential to bridge the gap between high-level national strategies and on-the-ground challenges that cities are facing. So theme 4 of the roadmap therefore looks at ways that cities can advocate for enhanced national policy frameworks. So for example, they can call for city and urban priorities and investment needs to be included in national plans. So for example, nationally defined contributions, NDCs, for example, by leveraging the Coalition for High Ambition Multilateral Partnerships, CHAMP, or at major climate milestone events, such as the Finance for Development Conference, COP30, U20, and other crucial milestones. Secondly, we looked at how cities can engage with national finance ministers to call for greater fiscal decentralization, which, when paired with capacity building, can empower cities to better access and reallocate resources for climate projects. And lastly, we looked at how cities can call on national governments to develop country-level platforms that are really crucial for aggregating projects and addressing issues of scale, which often prevent investability, as well as help with project preparation and de-risking. Next slide, please. So, for example, the Bitter Water project in Luanda demonstrates great collaboration between the Angolan national government and international institutions to improve the bankability of municipal water infrastructure. So using a $500 million guarantee from the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, the IBRD, the Angolan government actually secured $910 million in commercial loans that facilitated provision of clean water to 2 million people within the city via the city's water utility. And the guarantee reduced borrowing costs, extended loan maturity to 15 years, and mitigated default risks by incorporating a cash reserve for loss protection. Additional support from broader financing partners then helped to mobilize $1.1 billion in total financing, demonstrating how these guarantees and partnerships are really crucial to unlocking private investment in traditionally less attractive sectors in cities like water infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as Andrea noted previously, there is a $4.3 trillion gap of funding and financing that's needed annually to meet cities' climate finance needs in mitigation projects alone. And this is obviously going to require a huge increase in existing sources of funding and finance and how they are accessible to cities for climate action. So the last theme of the roadmap really looks at how city leaders can promote and call for increased climate finance and improved access for cities. And we looked at that through three main recommendations. The first is city leaders calling on multilateral development banks, global climate funds, and other key climate finance providers to increase the overall funding for climate action and issue more concessional finance, either individually, so the city using their own platform, or through collaboration with other city leaders via city networks. So, for example, endorsing open letters with targeted climate finance ask. And a great example of this includes a letter that was sent by C40 and the Global Covenant of Mayors last year, which asked MDBs for more support in general for cities. And in response to that, we've had 6 MDBs that have now responded and committed to work with us on scaling urban climate finance and strengthening urban adaptation, which is a fantastic result. The second thread looks at how city leaders can engage with national governments to shift finance and subsidies away from polluting industries and really to incentivize green investment in its place. And then lastly, looking at how city leaders can call on climate finance donors to provide greater funding and support for loss and damage and ensure that cities can access it. So this is really key given that only 2% of finance flows currently support adaptation measures, and the total financing needs for adaptation remain largely unknown. Next slide, please. So we have 2 examples for this final theme, which really demonstrate amazing action by cities and city networks on this advocacy front. The first is at the Green and Resilient Urban Shift Africa Forum, which Andrea mentioned earlier, which was February this year in Nairobi. At that conference, African mayors and governors came together to sign an open letter, which was addressed to African national finance ministers, urging reforms to unlock climate finance for cities. And since launching that letter, it's had over 40 mayors and governors from cities across Africa have actually signed it. And at the African Mayors Assembly Municipal Finance Session in Shwane, a couple of weeks ago for the U20, we had a national government responding positively to those asks, just showing the power of that ongoing engagement and how crucial it is for actionable commitments. And secondly, as previously mentioned, working on the Baku to Belém roadmap, so C40 and the Global Covenant of Mayors and other key partners have really been supporting the high-level expert group in ensuring that the voice of cities and city networks is really represented in the report that's been commissioned by the COP30 presidency. And this roadmap is going to be developed by the presidency to help close that $1.3 trillion climate funding and finance gap, and make sure that cities are really at the heart of the recommendations. So this clearly represents a really crucial milestone moment for sustainable finance for cities later this year. Thank you very much. I will now hand back over to you, Andrea.
Super. Thanks so much, Lucy, and really great to get into the details of that framework in the roadmap, which we encourage you to download the resource and have a look yourself. Now we'd like to turn it over to Jessie Press-Williams, who is with the Climate Policy Initiative and serves as Senior Analyst for the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, CCFLA, which is a really key partner for all of this work. Jessie, over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you to C40 and Urban Shift for putting this really great webinar together. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about attracting and mobilizing private finance for cities. As mentioned, I'm a senior analyst with CCFLA, and I lead our private sector workstream. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about CCFLA. We are a coalition of leaders committed to deploying finance for city-level climate action at scale by 2030. We are the leading multi-level and multi-stakeholder coalition aimed at closing the investment gap for urban and subnational climate projects and infrastructure worldwide. Next slide. We bring together over 80 institutions aiming to close the urban climate investment gap across 4 key constituency groups: demand for city climate finance, supply, including public and private sector, national governments, and enablers. Next slide, please. So very quickly, in the next 10 minutes, I will talk about who currently is investing in cities and the current state of private climate-aligned investment in cities with insights from the State of Cities Climate Finance Report, which was released in 2024. And then we'll talk about who could invest in cities with some insights from CCFLA's ongoing private sector engagement workstream. And then finally, how to bridge the gap. So why cities should engage and how to overcome barriers. Next slide, please. So here we see some of the key results from the State of Cities Climate Finance Report. This is the most comprehensive assessment of urban climate finance flows and needs, and it covers 2021 and 2022 averages for urban climate finance. We see overall that urban climate finance has increased, but the gap still remains, as the previous speakers highlighted, and must increase over fivefold to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius and other climate targets. In this graph, we can see that private finance already accounts for almost half of urban climate finance flows. And this means that it has over tripled since 2017. I'd like to direct, so the private finance you can see in orange there on the left-hand side under sources and intermediaries. It includes households and individuals, commercial financial institutions, corporations, and other sources of private investment. Of note are the largest sectors all the way over on the right. So where is the investment in cities going? We see that it's mostly going towards transport, particularly transportation infrastructure, electric vehicles, and other types of transport investments. Buildings and infrastructure is the second highest sector, and energy systems. So these are all very large infrastructure sectors that could be well aligned with increasing private investment and mobilizing this type of private investment for cities. Some additional trends to note from the data, and this is all available to be explored more on the CCFLA website. Over about 69% total of urban climate finance was sourced and provided domestically. This is particularly true for private flows, where domestic sources accounted for 96%. This means that cities looking for investment are far more likely to access capital from domestic sources. And that makes these domestic finance systems and actors really central to driving real change at scale for cities trying to achieve their climate goals. Next slide, please. So who is currently investing in cities? On the left, we have more of a breakdown from the State of Cities Climate Finance Report on urban climate finance by private actor in 2021 and 2022. So the largest providers of urban climate finance were households and individuals, followed by commercial financial institutions. This includes banks and investment firms, corporations, funds, and institutional investors. When we look specifically at infrastructure, we see the largest investors are actually commercial banks and investment banks. This is largely because households and individual financing was directed towards purchasing of electric vehicles. Next slide, please. But who could invest in cities? So the insights on this slide are from emerging CCFLA analysis, looking at potential sources of private investment, private finance for cities, and how to increase private sector engagement in the urban climate finance ecosystem. There is a huge case for investing in cities. Global Infrastructure Basel's recent report suggests that over a 15-year horizon, sustainable infrastructure could outperform conventional infrastructure by 20% or more. And infrastructure investments, such as those available in cities, is resilient to macroeconomic volatility and thus offers inflation protection for private investors, which could be particularly suitable for long-term investors. On the left, we have some work on assets under management by actor. So we look at capital providers and intermediaries, broken down by pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, commercial and investment banks, and infrastructure funds. This is to give a sense of where capital is concentrated globally in terms of how it could start flowing to cities for climate action. Most capital flows through intermediated vehicles, such as infrastructure funds and asset managers. This makes it even more critical for cities to aggregate investments to match investment needs with private capital requirements. Large sources of capital are still concentrated in pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds as well. On the right, we see a representation of current investment in infrastructure, so not just urban, and not just climate aligned, but all infrastructure from the Global Infrastructure Monitor. We focus on infrastructure here as a potential source of investment, as many urban climate projects tend to be seen as infrastructure projects and investments by investors, particularly when noting the key sectors, transport, buildings, and energy. Commercial banks are the largest infrastructure investors, already accounting for 45% of total investment flows, followed by other private sources, infrastructure developers, and MDBs. Next slide, please. So how to bridge the gap and what prevents investment in cities? CCFLA has recently launched a private sector workstream specifically focused on overcoming these barriers, increasing private sector engagement, private investment, and closing the gap. The 2024 State of Cities report that I mentioned earlier focused on the opportunity to invest in sustainable, climate-aligned urban infrastructure. Yet, scaling urban climate finance successfully requires acknowledging several systemic challenges that prevent cities from achieving their climate goals. The challenges on the left are cross-cutting between public and private investment. We focus on these 4 systemic challenges to help guide our work and action. First, insufficient global and national commitment to urban climate action. Global and national climate discussions prioritize national commitments and can often overlook urban and subnational needs. Second, weak enabling environments for city-level climate policy and finance. Inefficient cooperation between levels of government can miss the opportunity to strengthen the enabling environment for cities. Third, capacity gaps among cities and local governments. And then finally, inadequate capital mobilization at the city level. As mentioned by previous speakers, cities struggle with poor creditworthiness, limited access to capital markets, and limited fiscal capacity. This is particularly pronounced in emerging markets. These challenges create specific barriers or risks to private investment, and I will briefly touch on 4 categories of these here. First, financial and market risks. So seen from the private investment side, this can look like a lack of a subnational credit rating, a ticket size mismatch where the investments being asked for at the city level are too small, currency fluctuation risk in terms of investing subnationally, and climate risk assessments that are either missing or outdated. Communication challenges can be a lack of information on the local enabling environment or regulatory requirements for investing, a perceived risk of investing in cities that is very high, and direct communication challenges. For example, difficulties with investors even locating city projects and speaking with cities directly about potential investments. Third, operational and capacity risks. There's a lengthy timeline to operationalize city investments, and city-level capacity gaps can prevent them from successfully managing innovative financial instruments in the way required to facilitate investment. And finally, pipeline challenges. So there's a general lack of investor-ready projects. Projects might be missing feasibility studies. There might be additional TA required to get projects to investment ready. And again, this long time in terms of preparing the projects to be seen by investors. Last mile investment might be required, for example, requiring concessional capital. And then finally, even if there are investor-ready projects, these are often not communicated with investors, as I mentioned, under communication challenges. Next slide, please. So how can cities be supported to enhance their ability to attract private finance? How can we work together to overcome these challenges and barriers? I think the roadmap presented here is a really incredible resource. And many of the actions there will address these categories that I'm about to mention. So we talk about 3 kind of key categories of actions that can be taken by cities, but also by national governments and other stakeholders, such as the ones represented in CCFLA, to support cities. So I don't think cities can go it alone. There's a lot of actions that need to be taken by the entire ecosystem. Strengthening capacity within your government to prepare and implement projects. There are many C40 resources available on this that I think were already mentioned under thematic area 2. So I'll just mention one additional one, which is exploring opportunities to engage in programs that provide external expertise to support municipal governments. For example, building resilience capacity through the Resilient Cities Network, Global Risk and Resilience Fellowship, and then accessing online courses and capacity building workshops through Urban Shift. Second, enhancing the enabling environment. Improving creditworthiness can be done by strengthening budget management and financial performance. Improving the legal and regulatory conditions can also encourage the private sector to invest in city-level climate projects. And then collecting and sharing climate risk data with the private sector can also demonstrate the benefits of investing in these types of projects. CCFLA provides an enabling framework conditions assessment tool that can be used at the national and subnational levels to highlight the existing strengths in the enabling environment and support this process. And then finally, build a pipeline of investment-ready projects, ensuring projects are aligned with local and national climate adaptation strategies, exploring innovative options for financing and funding, and tagging projects to make sure that they're aligned with international taxonomies to indicate to the private sector that they have adaptation and resilience outcomes or are climate aligned with mitigation requirements. Project preparation facilities, or PPFs, can help across all of these areas and are really a critical partner in developing and financing climate projects. Next slide, please. So in closing, I'll point to a few key resources from CCFLA. One is the Project Preparation Resource Directory, which is an open online tool designed to help subnational governments and stakeholders identify PPFs that match their project preparation needs. The directory is global and focused on PPFs supporting green and climate resilient infrastructure with filters by country, sectors, and project stages. We encourage you to explore this and share this with your networks. There's a QR code there that you can download the resource, or it's available on our website. And next slide, please. And some additional CCFLA resources for better enabling private sector finance. We have a financial instruments library on the left that's available on our website, which includes a total of 72 instruments at the moment. The toolkit has several filters, so you can see which types of private or public financial instruments might be suitable for your city. Also integrated into the toolkit are many examples of case studies of where these instruments have been effectively implemented. So I encourage you to check that out to deepen your understanding of the options available. And then we are always looking for collaboration with our private sector action group. This brings together our members and private sector actors across the ecosystem to discuss these challenges and to enable more investment in cities. And then there are several more reports on our website: financial aggregation blueprints, improving local enabling conditions, and increasing subnational pension funds climate investments. So I'll close there. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse. Private finance is a huge part of the equation, but it's challenging for cities. And I think the resources CCFLA has are really fantastic. So do check them out. Okay, so we've talked about private finance. Public finance has a huge role to play as well, and a very important catalytic role to play that's related to the private finance discussion we just had. I'd like to introduce now Enrique Evers, who's Urban Development Manager with WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities based in Brazil. Enrique, over to you to speak on the public finance.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. I'm speaking directly from and melting from the hot Seville, as I am attending the Finance for Development conference here. It's great to have this discussion around public finance during such a rich and intense week of discussions here around that, and also around the private sector. I'm here representing the World Resources Institute and the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. We are a knowledge institution and an international NGO working with cities across the world. But I am from Brazil and working at the Brazilian office at WRI Brazil, based in Porto Alegre, where I lead our work on urban finance with many Brazilian cities. But what I will be trying to do here today is to connect a little bit this global discussion with my own experience in Brazil and the work that WRI Brazil is doing in the country, so you can relate and translate to the context to different countries, since I know this is a global discussion. Just checking, are you able to see me? My video? I won't be sharing
Yes, we can
any
see you.
slides. Okay, because I'm not seeing myself, so even better sometimes. Okay, so moving from the private to the public finance, right? It's really useful, the roadmap that the Urban Shift and C4 and partners are launching and presenting here today. since I believe I'm going to be talking about almost all the themes that were just presented by Lucy, except for the private thematic on the roadmap. And why? Well, Jesse just presented too. 49% of the investments that were mapped by CCFLA are from the private sector, but we can assume that the public finance is a huge piece of this. And why it's so important? Well, in the same graph that you saw, it's really clear that, for instance, the adaptation area relies mostly on public investments and struggles to catalyze private investments. So usually where financial returns are not clear or secured, and usually on adaptation, it's really key to have a strong focus from public finance, and that's how also we are used to see the investments. Which doesn't mean that adaptation cannot be financed by the private sector, but that's the current reality, and we've been working to trying to change it. But this usually imposes some biases on prioritization of action by governments, and also public finance, and it's important to consider that it can come from different sources. So when we are talking about public finance, we could be talking about intergovernmental transfers or the own resources of cities, but it can also be accessed or as external from external public resources as the development finance institutions or the development banks, as some will call. But and these DFIs also can be multilateral, bilateral, or even national or subnational levels. So clearly, this is already a very complex scenario. Each one of these sources brings specific criteria, processes, flows of money, regulatory frameworks. So to navigate on it, it will require a lot of technical capacity from cities to understand how this ecosystem works. And along with that, this search for funding usually needs to go along with the design of a bankable project. So that's the current and the business as usual discussion around the lack of capacity and the lack of good projects and bankable projects that cities needs to present. Today, in this discussion, I will explore a little bit more the other side of it. I will explore governmental investments and the role of the DFIs, also considering the regulatory barriers that may require reforms, accelerating and increasing available resources. But before moving on that and looking at more to the external resources, I just wanted to highlight and ask you to keep in mind that when we are talking about public finance, we are also talking about own resources that are generated by municipal revenues like property taxes. And this is a very key for increasing investment for local climate action. We won't be talking about it, but please don't forget it and don't rely only on external public resources if you are a city or working on a municipal level. Another thing to keep in mind is for us to understand this organization of supply and demand sides in the investment. So the demand side are more related to the projects itself, as I told you, that relies on the design and bankable projects and so on. And these are the type of projects that will require infrastructure investments or urban services investments. So let's analyze the supply side, which relies on public government and the DFIs mostly. Coming from this introduction, more to understand where I'll be diving in, I wanted to start sharing with you some experiences that we had here in Brazil. So we've been working with these DFIs, no, the development finance institutions, for a long time. Since 2017, we and some partners, we host a network called FISC Network, where we've been discussing specifically the access or the barriers to access of finance for urban infrastructure, sustainable urban infrastructure by subnational governments. And as a result of these discussions and during the many meetings and research that we did in this network, we were able to identify major barriers for this access to public finance that goes way beyond the lack of technical capacity by the municipalities or the lack of technical capacity to prepare and design bankable projects. Not curious, these challenges can be organized in a very similar way that the final outcome document of the Finance for Development conference here in Seville. So I will try to create some connections between what is being discussed here and what we are seeing in Brazil and in this network, and how cities, the subnational governments, the municipalities of Brazil, struggles or try to work with in terms of trying to access external resources, either domestically or from abroad. First, the finance for development are defining four main categories. The reform of the global financial system, which is basically the need of reforming regulatory reforms, if we can relate to a domestical scenario. How to integrate climate and development. So it relates to prioritization of budgets, climate budgeting, as was presented before, and flip the portfolio of investments, and debt sustainability and financial stability that relates a lot with the fiscal health of the municipalities and the fiscal reforms needed for municipalities. So these are all things that are very important, and they were mapped through the FISC network here in Brazil. We need to unlock some regulatory barriers that we have internally in the country. We need to reassess and adjust the portfolio of investments from the government, from the national government, and from the development finance institutions. And we need to take a very serious look to the fiscal health of municipalities, especially the smaller ones. The fourth category that is being discussed here in the finance for development is more related to the private sector. So Jessie already explored a lot of that in her presentation. So in that sense, some experiences that we are seeing since the last two, 3 years here in Brazil related to public finance. First, we are seeing national programs like the Green and Resilient Cities program, many investments of the Acceleration Growth program, and programs like the Periferia Viva program from Ministry of Cities here in Brazil are driving investments towards climate action or urban-related climate action, also related to reduce vulnerabilities and inequalities in cities. And the Ministry of Cities is doing a very interesting mapping of how much of these investments are, or towards what these investments are going. But bottom line, the government is increasing funds available, and especially no reimbursable resources available for municipalities to invest in climate action with public finance. Same with the Fundo Clima, the climate fund of Brazil, that just set new standards and criteria that drive and allows resources for municipalities and for urban climate action. So these are examples of driving public finance towards climate action and towards the subnational governments. In terms of regulatory reforms, we are pushing this discussion through the FISC network too, but many other partners are also looking at it on ways of how or rethink credit rates and prioritization of lending by confronting the fiscal health and climate vulnerability. In FISC network, for instance, we are starting a discussion of the cost of inaction related to urban adaptation as an economic argument for relativizing a little bit the fiscal constraints that we have in some municipalities. But we are also pushing for building technical capacity for national and subnational finance institutions. See, I'm not talking about building capacity in cities to design the projects. I'm talking about building technical capacity about urban climate action in the development finance institutions. And this type of work is producing outcomes like the technical support that we provided to new and enhanced credit lines and financial mechanisms, like we saw the bank called Badesul, which is a state level bank here in the state of Rio Grande do Sul of Brazil, that launched the first credit line for nature-based solutions, and also the Banco de Desenvolvimento de Minas Gerais, the Bank of the State of Minas Gerais in Brazil too, that included NBS criteria for investment in cities. And many others, like BNDES is also doing that, and as I mentioned, the Climate Fund here in Brazil. So things that should be moving or are starting to move in terms of enhancing the capacity and the quality of the supply side of the credit for public investments here in Brazil. More things that needs to be done. Portfolio transition from both governments and DFIs, but the examples that I just mentioned are related to it. And the DFIs should be, and they are, and we are trying to help on that, should be working together to push for policy reforms and unlock the access of subnational governments to the available climate finance by these institutions. Public finance and regulatory reforms needs to be seen as a catalyst of private investments. So there's even though we are separating the public and private here in the presentations, there's a connection between them through mechanisms like blended finance and other de-risking mechanisms that can use public finance as a way to catalyze private investments. In general, this is kind of the current frame and the work that we've been doing here in Brazil, and I hope that this could help us to navigate better in the post FFD4 track and to COP30 and beyond to enhance subnational finance for climate action and development. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Enrique, for sharing with us your perspective from Brazil, and which has clearly created a lot of initiatives to support subnational access to finance and has quite a sophisticated market of subnational banks as well, which is quite unusual. And I think that it's good reminder also that when we talk about public finance, like you said, it's not just the multilateral finance, it's the domestic capital that is within every country that you've got to unlock, as well as the funding within the cities that also counts as your public finance. And there's really great work that you're doing with the FIS network. So thank you for that. Now let's turn over to Gulnara Roll, who's head of the cities unit at UNIP for some closing remarks. And I think we're almost at time, so we're not going to be able to do live Q&A. So please feel free to send any more questions in the Q&A box. Thank you, Gulnara.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you so much, colleagues, for this invitation. So it was really just as conclusion that we already heard that the needs are so high for the local governments to receive finance, but I think also at the FFD conference here, we hear again and again that only 1% of international climate finance actually go to the local governments. So there is really a huge mismatch in this. And Enrico right now was speaking also about the importance of that adaptation. And UNEP State of Finance for Natures in Cities report also highlights especially the gap of the finance for the adaptation. And the adaptation, as we're going to Belém, we really see that this is something which really requires lots of attention. So the State of Finance for Nature in Cities report says that while we need today 542 billion annually by 2030 for nature-based solutions, which is basically the basis for the adaptation, we are currently investing only 200,000 billion. So there is a deficit annually of over 300,000 billion dollars, and at the same time, $7 trillion of dollars goes into the nature negative activities. So it's really a very serious gap, financing gap, and it was very good to hear, Andrea, from you information on the roadmap and examples. And we heard today, actually, in the FFD as well, many good examples when cities are working on different innovative financing initiatives. However, integration of this work is very important. And from this point of view, congratulations on launching the Sustainable Finance Action and Advocacy Roadmap. It is really a very important tool. It's a very important tool, as Andrea, you mentioned, it's a very special year for the cities with multiple milestones, with the C40 event in Rio and the climate COP coming up in November. Really congratulations on the very comprehensive roadmap with a full spectrum of information. At one hand, on barriers that cities facing in accessing and managing finance, but also very clear proposals about how we can overcome them. It was great to hear from Jesse on the private finance, and the number of 49% of private finance is really impressive. So, and big thanks to Jesse for this very clear overview of what are the approaches for accessing private financing. We heard from Henrika today on the opportunities on the public finance access, indeed developing own revenues, building capacities for developing own sources of revenues are very, very important. And yes, exactly, as Henrik was mentioning in his intervention here at the fourth International Conference for Financing for Development, there is discussion on subnational finance. Unfortunately, it is really more kind of offside. It's not yet the mainstream. And for instance, I'm here also with my colleagues from the UNEP Financial Initiative who are working very close to the private sector. And we really see that the subnational finance still need a lot of advocacy, a lot of informing those people who are working with the national government, and especially those who are working with the private sector. We are very excited that, of course, the outcome document includes that information. However, it is not non-committal, and we definitely need to move much further ahead with a discussion at the FFD platform on the subnational finance. There is a need in expanding the fiscal space for local government, integrating local priorities into the national financing strategies. We really want to hear much more about this at these kind of conferences. And we all together through the partnership can do even more to build capacities of the cities and provide more information for the pipelines of bankable projects, about which a lot of discussions were today as well. And finally, I just wanted to say that we are also very excited that today the government of Spain, the Local 2030 Coalition, OECD, and many partners, banks and private partners, and many of you organizing this event, launched today the Sevilla Platform for Action initiative named Localizing Finance to Drive Systemic Impact for the Achievement of the 2030 Agenda. There was already a very high-level event. It's a very ambitious document, and maybe this is really allows us to use it as a door into mainstreaming the discussion of the subnational finance in the existing discussions at FFD on public and private financing for subnational governments. With that, I wanted to thank our partners, C40, GCOM, CCFLA, and all working through Urban Shift for your leadership and collaboration, and also for this amazing seminar. And thank you so much for inviting UNEP speaking here. So let's really working together to advocate, collaborate, and work towards the next very important global milestones of this year, which will be this year, of course. This year will be very busy, but we are all very excited and very grateful to working together. Thank you so much, Andrea, and back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gulnara, and thank you for pushing the city's agenda for all of you out who are out there in Sevilla in the heat, trying to push this agenda forward. It's a really good reminder of how far we've come, but how much more work we still have to do, and that's why we developed this roadmap to support all of you in becoming champions for urban finance. So with that, we will conclude. Apologies, we don't have time for the live Q&A, but hopefully we've tried to answer most of your questions during the call. And of course, we will send you all the links and relevant resources after the call. Thank you to all our speakers today and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.